Generally, if you feel a sense of déjà vu as you survey the landscape of American democracy and politics at this fraught moment, you're not alone. I feel it too. We have very much been here before. There are so many ways in which the first year of the Biden administration harkens back to the first year of the Obama administration. And that's despite the fact that we generally see George W. Bush and Donald Trump as kind of opposite ends of the spectrum of modern Republican politics. But both Biden and Obama came to office after Republican administrations desecrated the rule of law, opposed all efforts to prepare the country for the looming and growing crisis of climate change, and then to boot left the country mired in historic crises, huge, crushing problems that had to be solved immediately. That is what Barack Obama inherited on January 20th, 2009. That is what Joe Biden inherited on January 20th, 2021. And because of the similarities between these two, there's a lot to learn. I mean, there are lessons about how to pass a democratic agenda. There are lessons about obstruction and Senator Mitch McConnell's true nature, whether you can trust him. There are lessons about the importance of tangibly improving people's lives as fast as possible. But one of the biggest lessons, to my mind, one that occupies us on this day, is about accountability, the rule of law, and what happens to people who transgress. So today, we saw the very first sentencing for a January 6th rioter who was convicted of a felony. This is a first. His name is Paul Hodgkins, 38-year-old out of Tampa, Florida, who pleaded guilty to obstructing an official proceeding when he entered the Capitol building carrying a Trump 2020 flag. He made his way into the Senate chamber and he took selfies there. He received 8 months in prison, significantly less than the 18 months prosecutors asked for. We're going to talk a little bit more about that sentence and what it means. But overall, when you step back, the FBI and the Department of Justice, I think, have done a pretty admirable job with this massive investigation in the wake of the insurrection. I remember on January 6th, as we were all watching live, right, as the people who stormed the Capitol just escaped, they all got away, thinking, well, it's going to be a little hard to find them. But the FBI and DOJ have done a very good job of tracking these people down and then building cases and then bringing charge against them. There are more than 500 people who have now been arrested. But in some ways, bringing accountability to those people, people like Paul Hodgkins, is the easier thing for our justice system to do. The much harder thing is dealing with the powerful people at the top. Today, we also learned the Department of Justice will not prosecute Donald Trump's former Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross for lying to Congress. You may remember this episode. We covered it a bunch. It was so sort of egregious even at the time. But Ross testified in Congress that he decided to add a question about the citizenship status of folks to the census after the Department of Justice said that data was needed to enforce the Voting Rights Act, federal voting laws. Please, Wilbur Ross, you got to add this to the census. The truth was essentially the opposite. Ross admitted he started thinking about the issue and then reached out to the DOJ to suggest they request adding the question. Could you send me a request to add the question? Because I want to add the question. Anyway, the effort was unsuccessful. Luckily, the Supreme Court ruled in 2019 they could not include the citizenship question on the consensus. Mostly they ruled because the whole thing was so shoddy and obviously manifestly manipulated and deceitful. But it was a pretty blatant attempt to intimidate immigrants, and by intimidating immigrants, reduce their representation in the Senate, in the census. Okay. Now, Wilbur Ross, you remember him, 83-year-old multimillionaire, most notable for falling asleep in meetings and wearing $600 slippers. The Wilbur Rosses of the world, well, they often escape accountability. Again, we've been here before. Before Barack Obama became president, he said he would hold people to account for the war crimes the United States authorized and then committed during the Bush administration. And I do not use that term lightly. There were orders to allow torture, like waterboarding and other things that were clearly in violation of both the Geneva Convention and domestic law. Barack Obama was clear-eyed about that transgression, but also about the political reality of potentially prosecuting former officials.
We're still evaluating how we are going to approach the whole issue of interrogations, detentions, and so forth. And obviously, we're going to be looking at past practices. And I don't believe that anybody is above the law. On the other hand, I also have a belief that we need to look forward as opposed to looking backwards.
Forward, not backward. That would be an important slogan at that time. Now, war crimes had been prosecuted in the wake of the abuse at, say, the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. the most probably more notorious and recorded documented war crime of the Bush years. 11 U.S. soldiers were convicted of crimes related to the abuse captured in those infamous photos. Former Army Reserve soldier Lindy England was sentenced to 3 years in prison for her role. But remember, nothing ever happened to Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, who authorized the use of the interrogation techniques that multiple reports found led to Abu Ghraib. And that was the pattern. The question at the beginning of the Obama administration was that pattern going to change? The answer is, it did not. I think the reason is that the compounding crises and the fixed amount of political capital, at least the perception thereof, the Obama administration essentially decided not to prosecute the engineers of the torture regime. At the time, I thought they should have. In hindsight, I think they still should have. But I want to give them their due. You could oversimplify how easy a call these things are. I mean, there's a reason that people are hesitant to prosecute members of the government, particularly if we're talking about prosecuting political officials of the other party once you take power. There are political reasons for that, the blowback, right? And rule of law reasons for that. You definitely do not want to end up in a lock her up cycle in which each successive administration jails members of the previous one in a never-ending tit for tat, which is a thing that happens in many countries. But, when the law is violated in egregious ways to torture people, when it's violated by the people entrusted with the power to uphold and enforce the law, there must be accountability for that. And there was essentially none in the Bush administration. John Hughes, the guy who wrote the torture memo, was a tenured faculty at Berkeley, just chilling, goes on cable news, teaches. Hey. And there's a direct line between that lack of accountability and the world that we find ourselves in now. I mean, yes, Donald Trump was impeached twice, and yet he sits at Mar-a-Lago giving interviews where he sounds like a person entirely and completely fixated on upending American democracy, having tried and failed once already. Like, he's focused. He knows what he wants to do again. They tested out all the weak parts in the fence. They're going to come for the fence again. Yes, he is still being investigated by the Manhattan District Attorney, but the dude tried to foment a coup 6 months ago. I don't know what to tell you. That's what's waiting in the wings. That's what's being hatched. It's being plotted, obviously in front of all of our faces. Listen to what the man says. And as Donald Eyre and Danielle Bryan and Norm Eisen write in the New York Times, those at the top who encouraged and incited the insurrection of January 6th should face accountability the same way that more than 500 writers have and will. And yet, here we are again, they remain untouched.